Paula stood on the deck of the Renaissance R8 cruise ship, gazing out at the tranquil blue waters of the Mediterranean. It was a crisp autumn day in 2001, but the chill in the air did little to cool the growing tension aboard the ship. Unbeknownst to the passengers enjoying their luxurious surroundings, the R8 was a vessel adrift, not just on the Mediterranean currents, but in a sea of corporate turmoil and financial ruin. The young Australian had joined Renaissance Cruises with a thirst for adventure, leaving behind her quiet country town of Kapunda for a life at sea. In just a year, she had risen from bar waiter to assistant bar manager, embracing the hard-partying lifestyle and close-knit camaraderie that came with working on a cruise ship. But beneath the veneer of carefree living, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. It all began on that fateful September day, when the world watched in horror as the Twin Towers fell in New York. The shockwaves reverberated across the globe, and the cruise industry was not spared. Renaissance, already teetering on the brink of insolvency, saw its bookings plummet in the wake of 9/11. Desperate to stay afloat, the company hatched a daring plan to send its ships out to sea, beyond the reach of the authorities who threatened to seize them in port. For Paula and her crewmates, it was the beginning of a surreal odyssey. The R8 set sail from Lisbon with a skeleton crew and only a handful of bewildered passengers. Their destination was unknown, their fate uncertain. Captain Giuseppe Lemme, a charismatic Italian, did his best to keep morale high, but anxiety simmered beneath the surface. With the ship's communications cut off and rumors flying, the crew could only speculate about what awaited them. As the days turned into weeks, the R8 meandered aimlessly through the Mediterranean, a ghost ship haunted by the specter of bankruptcy. Provisions began to run low, and with them, the crew's spirits. Alcohol, the lifeblood of cruise ship revelry, was rationed as supplies dwindled. Desperation began to set in. But then, news of the company's bankruptcy hit the ship like a bombshell. Rather than succumbing to despair, the crew decided to embrace the chaos and throw caution to the wind. If the ship was going down, they were determined to go down partying. Night after night, the crew raided the ship's dwindling alcohol reserves, determined to drink away their worries in a haze of vodka and Baileys. Impromptu parties erupted on every deck, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear, anger, and reckless abandon. The ship's lounges and bars, once the exclusive domain of paying passengers, became the crew's personal playgrounds. Paula found herself at the center of the maelstrom, leading the charge with her fellow Australians. They commandeered the ship's sound system, blasting music into the wee hours of the morning. Dance floors sprang up in the most unlikely of places, from the promenade deck to the engine room. It was a scene straight out of a dystopian novel, the last days of Rome played out on the high seas. The officers, perhaps sensing the futility of trying to maintain order, largely turned a blind eye to the debauchery. Some even joined in, shedding their uniforms and rank for a chance to cut loose and forget the looming specter of unemployment. It was a surreal time, a moment suspended between the old world and the new, where the rules no longer applied. As the ship drifted aimlessly, tempers frayed and tensions boiled over. Fights broke out among the crew, fueled by the toxic mix of alcohol and uncertainty. Paula found solace in the arms of the ship's executive chef, a married South African with whom she carried on a clandestine affair. It was a welcome distraction from the growing sense of unease that pervaded the ship. The R8's sister ship, the R5, was also playing a cat-and-mouse game with the authorities. In a cloak-and-dagger rendezvous worthy of a spy novel, the two vessels met in the middle of the Mediterranean to replenish their dwindling supplies. Paula watched in disbelief as tenders ferried precious cargo between the ships. Rice for the R5, alcohol for the R8. It was a surreal scene, a reminder of just how far they had strayed from the normal rhythms of cruise ship life. Finally, after weeks of aimless drifting, word came from the Home Office. The ships were to make for Gibraltar, where a deal had been struck with the authorities. But even as the R8 steamed towards the tiny British territory, a sense of foreboding hung over the ship. Paula and her crewmates knew that their adventure was coming to an end, but what awaited them in Gibraltar was anyone's guess. As the ship glided into port, Paula couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into a trap. Her fears were soon confirmed as security personnel swarmed the vessel, placing it under immediate arrest. The crew were virtual prisoners, confined to the ship and forbidden from setting foot on land. Even the tiny floating platform that served as their dock was off limits. Paula could only watch from the deck as the comforts of civilization, fast food, phone calls home, the little luxuries that made ship life bearable, taunted them from just out of reach. In a desperate bid for freedom, Paula befriended the youngest of the security guards, a strapping lad with a soft spot for a damsel in distress. With his help, she managed to sneak off the ship for a few precious hours, savoring the taste of a McDonald's burger and the sound of a friendly voice on the other end of a phone line. But even those small victories felt hollow in the face of the uncertainty that loomed over their future. As the days dragged on, morale aboard the R8 plummeted to new depths. Paula watched as her crewmates began to crack under the strain, some retreating into a haze of alcohol and drugs, others literally jumping ship in a desperate bid for freedom. Two young New Zealanders, driven to the brink by the monotony and isolation, hurled themselves overboard in the middle of the night, preferring to take their chances with the dark waters of the Mediterranean than spend another day trapped on the floating prison. In the end, it was the arrival of the consulates that finally broke the stalemate. Representatives from 52 countries descended on Gibraltar, each fighting for the rights of their citizens aboard the stricken ship. Paula watched in amazement as the dominoes began to fall, the authorities finally relenting under the weight of international pressure. For Paula, the ordeal was finally over. With a heavy heart, she packed her belongings and prepared to leave the R8 behind. As she walked down the gangway for the last time, she couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for the ship that had been her home for the past year. Despite all the chaos and heartbreak, there was a part of her that would always belong to the R8 and the ragtag band of misfits who called it home. In the years that followed, Paula would look back on her time with Renaissance as a defining moment in her life. It was a baptism by fire, a test of her resilience and resourcefulness in the face of unimaginable adversity. She had survived the Mediterranean mutiny, but the scars it left, both physical and emotional, would stay with her forever. Through mutinies and arrests, love affairs, and betrayals, Paula had discovered a strength and resilience she never knew she possessed. And as the plane lifted off the runway, she closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her, the good, the bad, and the unforgettable. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a new voyage into the unknown. But whatever lay ahead, Paula knew that she was ready for it. After all, she was a survivor of the Mediterranean mutiny, and there was nothing the world could throw at her that she couldn't handle. With a smile on her face and a glint in her eye, Paula settled back into her seat and let the world fade away, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. If you're interested in hearing authentic stories from cruise ship workers, I highly recommend listening to the captivating podcast called My Ship Story. The stories shared on that podcast served as the inspiration and source material that made this Cruise Ship Confessions video channel possible.